Welcome to the Kundalini Connection, our
Welcome.
weekly live podcast where we connect Kundalini with, well, just about everything. We are your hosts, Michael and Linda Molina,
Hello.
and today we're joined by author and teacher Corinne Lebrun. Hello, Corinne.
Hello.
Hello, how are you guys today?
We're doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm actually really excited to talk about all these wonderful things that we've been noodling around about in our minds.
Yes.
So, Corinne, for people that are listening that might not be fully aware of what Kundalini is, I wanted to just go into that for a second and talk about, from your perspective, what you feel Kundalini is. But then also, I know that over the years, people have been coming to you for help with regard to Kundalini, and specifically people going through, let's say, adverse Kundalini awakening. So where they're experiencing maybe positive things, maybe negative things, but coming to you for help and advice. And so it kind of speaks to the fact of how powerful this mechanism is, the fact that people are going through such a range of experiences. Can you talk from your perspective what Kundalini is, and then why are all these people coming to you for help?
That's a really good question. So Kundalini, I probably need to cover several different areas to talk about in my experience, what I believe Kundalini is. And Kundalini itself is the essence of life force. It is the essence of that which is the biological mechanism which creates life. And everybody has this alive in them. To some people, it's a smaller degree. To some people, it's a larger degree. And Kundalini energy itself, sometimes people go through these massive leaps where, let's call it can be a funnel, a thin stream. You can have a thin stream of pranic energy, life energy moving through you, or it can suddenly be a fire hose moving through you. And when it goes from a leap from having a small stream to a fire hose, that's when sometimes people really notice the difference. But Kundalini itself most often brings people mystical experiences of things they might have only thought about, or perhaps even intellectually entertained, or maybe not even. And it opens them up to an entirely new world of perception. Of, wow, this world isn't just three-dimensional. It's far more than that. I can actually feel and sense things. And so anyway, but that's just a general overview of what I believe Kundalini to be. So it's both, in the short form, the answer is it's a biological mechanism which mirrors something that already exists in the energetic, etheric, or let's call it the mystical. So it's a bridge between both worlds.
Got it.
So Kundalini itself, let's say if we have that definition for it, one thing I really want to talk about the difference, because it's funny, if I talk about Kundalini, some people say, oh yeah, I haven't tried that yoga tradition. Right. And it's like, well, actually, Kundalini is very different than Kundalini yoga. Kundalini yoga is a term for a type of yoga that is meant to awaken your Kundalini. And that's the difference. And it's you don't have to do Kundalini yoga to activate your Kundalini or expand your Kundalini. You could be of any tradition, any walk of life, any spiritual path, and they just call it something different. Right. So that's something else, we can talk about later in the podcast, is what different traditions call Kundalini. And so that's something I really want to make it differentiate for people. Is Kundalini is, let's call it, the biological mechanism of awakening. And then you have Kundalini yoga, which is an entirely different thing. And that is one system and one way to get there. So that's a...
When people are going through adverse awakenings, is it something in the mechanism, something in themselves, like, and what kinds of things are they going through and coming to you about?
Yeah, that's a really good, that's also a multifaceted question. People will experience, first of all, they come to me because I've had a couple Kundalini awakenings, let's call them massive leaps in my life. And I finally decided to share about one on Facebook. And I was like, okay, I'm finally going to get this out there. I'm going to be brave. And it was when I had the this feeling of bliss moving through me, which it comes and goes. And so I shared about that. And then I started sharing more about Kundalini in the process. And since then, I've had people reach out from all over the world. I even did a Zoom call with somebody in Taiwan once. It was really phenomenal. But people reach out to me because they've had positive experiences where they have this extraordinary feeling of bliss, or they've had a feeling of, let's say, it feels like fire moving through their veins, or, you know, all of a sudden they start getting physically ill, or they're not able to maintain focus anymore. I mean, we have all different types of things. Some people experience has been labeled spontaneous kriyas because some of the movements match those things in the yogic traditions, which is really fascinating because it's helping your meridians move in a certain way, helping the energy move through your body in a certain way. And you know, I've had people reach out to me for you know, all different facets. But I tell you, there's one common thread when people reach out, and as people really want to be heard, and they want to feel like they're not crazy, because that was me. That was definitely me. When I first had these things happen, I didn't know who to turn to. There was a small collection of people I knew in San Francisco who used to be part of the, the Spiritual Emergency Network.
Okay.
And I used to be in touch with some of those folks. And so they knew about Kundalini. But now when people, for instance, reach out to me, they really want someone to hear their story. So I have like these amazing Kundalini stories in my emails. You know, it's like I wish I could actually had the time to properly respond to everybody. And they're so fascinating and so multifaceted that it just, I can see how it makes everyone feel much more, it's like, it's important to have a community and not feel alone. And that's why it's so wonderful for people to have Brilliano, which is, you know, part of the Emerging Sciences Foundation, the platform that helps people, for anybody who's listening. And I'm sure Mike and Linda can talk more about that. But for people to come and feel heard. So that's one of the main things.
So in terms of like negative symptoms, things that people are going through that may be uncomfortable or might scare them, what have you seen, or what's I guess one of the more common experiences that people have?
Yeah, well, most common experiences are feelings of energy moving through your body that are not comfortable or painful. So those are things that happened to me as well when I first, actually when I had this awakening in 2010, which basically sent me through a cosmic leap of consciousness, and all of a sudden being able to truly sense energy around me, which is something I intellectually thought, oh yeah, I can feel the energy around a crystal. But once this happened, it was like, oh wow, I can now really feel everything. And with that, this is what happens to quite a lot of people. You'll feel like you have a sense of bliss and peace that feels almost like angelic wrapping itself, that you were enveloped in this. But then when you get triggered, suddenly that energy goes out of phase, and you can start, I mean, that's when it might feel like you have fire running through your veins, or you just really can't control your emotions. And you feel completely emotionally challenged on a whole new level that you never have. So that is one of the things also, is emotional challenges, because as your consciousness expands, you become far more emotionally sensitive. And so emotional sensitivity, having physical symptoms of energy moving through you, and then sometimes, and people literally put their entire backs out because of Kundalini moving through them and whipping their heads around too fast, or, you know, trying to do something to shake it to move in the right place, and then they end up hurting themselves.
So that's interesting, Corinne. You mentioned triggered and being emotionally thrown off. A lot of things I've noticed is, you know, why these practices, they encourage balance. And I'm assuming it's because, you know, if you maintain balance and you maintain center, and even though you're going through like a bliss state, and within you stay centered, because you know life is a cycle. You know that when you're up in that bliss state, it's gonna come down. And it depends on you on how much you can stay just centered, that
Mhm.
you're not swinging so far like a pendulum. Is this something that maybe you've encountered as well? Is this?
Oh yeah, entirely. I mean that to me, like what you just said, takes a great deal of wisdom to understand within yourself. To understand that these peak experiences don't just stay. It's not something you're meant to, or even that you can maintain living in the modern world, and not shaming yourself when you suddenly start contracting or when you get triggered by something. And that was something for me when I first started having Kundalini experiences and feeling such like expanded, extraordinary states of consciousness, and then getting triggered, and then bam, I'd be in the dark night of the soul. And that's something else that I hear people talking about quite a bit is, and these are also part of the stories, is people feel like, what did they do wrong? What happened? Like, why are they essentially like fallen from grace? Why are they suddenly cut off from that feeling of being connected to the universe? And then some people have even developed a term for it, calling it Kundalini depression,
Mm.
which I found was fascinating, that people have developed a terminology around this, and that is also very similar to the dark night of the soul. When you, especially when you don't understand, like you said, it's like part of the process of expansion and contraction. You could really get down on yourself for that, thinking that, oh, I was able to reach this heightened state of consciousness, so why can't I maintain this?
So I
And
just frame this really quick for listeners. So Corinne earlier was talking about Kundalini as this evolutionary mechanism inside all of us, and typically when this mechanism becomes active, the entire nervous system, in fact, every cell in the body is involved, but particularly the central nervous system. And so as this energy is awakened, the nervous system comes alive and begins intaking enormous amounts of prana, life energy, and that oftentimes can cause discomfort in people and various symptoms where they're either feeling something, hearing something, seeing
So it
something.
it tends to heighten all your senses.
It can, but I think even more so, it enhances the sense of the awareness of energy, of bioenergy in the body. And so, people going through this experience can become alarmed, especially if they're not educated about Kundalini. So one thing I'm curious about, Corinne, is when people come to you and they are heard, what does that do for people? Like, how does that benefit a Kundalini experiencer to be heard?
that's a good question. I actually haven't prepared any questions for people or before and after or any metrics, but that would be a really good thing to have.
But I mean,
But I have,
like,
yeah,
do they get some sort of like emotional release? Is it just being acknowledged
yeah,
and knowing?
entirely,
Yeah.
entirely. It's a relief. And I'm always surprised, like sometimes I just have such limited time to, with a day job and everything, to respond to people, but I can at least respond to some things. And I can, you can feel the relief with people, like, oh my God, thank you for letting me know that I'm not crazy. It's like a sense of relief that, wow, you're actually on the journey, and you're doing something that actually has there's a system to it. These are things that are expected to happen on the journey. Especially since I started putting together my course. I put together a course that just has different topics that people would continuously ask me about. And I'm finding that by people walking through those, or even just reading the splash page, even just reading the sales page, I found this is what was interesting. People feel much more heartened. I think just having that out there has helped people,
Yeah.
because they realize they're not alone, they're not crazy, that people deal with very similar things, that, people deal with, how do you not be so energetically sensitive? How do you walk around in the world like this now? How do you deal with the dark night of the soul? Like, what are you supposed to do with Kundalini? So even just having people know that does provide a sense of relief, and because otherwise you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. your dark
Yeah.
night of the soul. That reminds me of my surrenders, my little deaths is what I call them. Is it
Yeah.
very similar? Like when someone has come to a point of needing to heal, uh, it could be a certain trait, behavior, idea, whatever it is, a pain needs to be released. And now it's time to let it go. But it becomes so painful because sometimes you don't even know that that's what you need to do until the struggle points you in that direction. And then it's that time to now let it go, to let that part of you die and now be reborn into someone new. Is that very similar to what you've experienced the dark night of the soul is?
Um, there's some similarities there, but I would definitely differentiate the process of going in, let's call it doing shadow work, where you're working on, aspects of yourself that are sometimes it's hard to let go, those pieces of identity, and finding blocks and knowing that there's a way out. It's like when you're working on things, you're like, okay, I know I need to work on this one specific area of my life, and I know that I'm going to get out on the other side. And you sort of have a method, you have a trajectory that you know you can make it. So I think that is one of the things I'm just thinking off the top of my head, because they're very, very different feelings. Even in those times when you are working on yourself, you still have a connection to, let's call it, I like calling my God my higher power. So, you still really feel that connection to your higher power. You still feel like you're guided with the synchronicities. You still feel like you're guided with these incredible, unexpected events that help support you. And so that's one type of just internal work. But dark night of the soul, really all of it gets removed. There's no connection. There's no synchronicity. There appears to be no way out. There appears to be just a sudden withdrawal of any type of grace at all. And it is a very dark and deep, depressed place where people can really struggle and feel like, what am I doing wrong? And it just sometimes just takes the stamina to sit through it and keep praying. And then the answer does eventually come. But to be in that's why it's called the dark night of the soul, because there is no light. It's like having a dark shroud, like a lead blanket of unconsciousness thrown on top of you, where that, my God, had all these things happen to me even 6 months ago, I'd be able to figure out the answer in my head. But because you are shrouded with this darkness, you can't figure out the answer you could have figured out for yourself the day before, or even 6 months before, because you are in this state of either being, if I had to analyze it, either being incredibly triggered, or perhaps it might be processing some type of past life thing, or it just might be shame. Who knows why you're thrown into that? And when people, come to me feeling those things, it's like recognizing they need outside support is the most important thing to help them. So like to go find a licensed therapist, somebody who understands a spiritual path. Like I always refer people to Jungian psychologists because they're easier to find than just a spiritual psychologist, and Jungian psychologists understand the depths of the psyche and the shadow and how to actually move people out of those places professionally. So those are, so it's like sending people to the right place and knowing you can ask for help, and that help is out there. And those true dark night of the soul places is what's important for people. So yeah, it's how I would differentiate the two, because I've experienced those myself. And it was only one time in my life, thank God, that I had a true dark night of the soul. Since then you go through light and dark times, of course, but the dark night of the soul was even the sunlight. Even being in the sun was painful for me, because I felt like, my God, I must have done something terribly wrong to fail God. That's how I felt.
So I just want to talk about my own experience, and this may or may not be what you're referring to, but I think it's worth mentioning. So many years ago, I had a very powerful Kundalini awakening, and that was attended by an experience of higher consciousness as well. And this experience lasted for a good while, throughout the day. But that evening, it faded away, the perception of higher consciousness, and I felt very blessed, in the beginning. But suddenly, as the evening was coming on, I began feeling this what you're talking about, this blanket of darkness, of depression. And the base, and a long time ago, I had heard, hell is the complete absence of God. Hell is being completely disconnected from God or the divine. And that's really what I felt in that moment, was a complete disconnection, a complete fracturing, a separation between myself and the universe and God and really everything else. And during that state, I remember the only thing that I could do was more or less write it out and just try to remind myself to have faith in this process. So what I did was I committed myself to just surrendering. Was really the main thing, surrendering to God and saying, this is the will of the divine. I'm going to go through this. And the next morning when I woke up, it was as if, and maybe this is uncommon, and maybe I was just blessed or lucky in the situation, but in the morning I woke up and it felt like I had been in some ways reborn into a new body, into a new mind, into a new soul. That there was really the part of me that existed before this experience had in some ways died off, and now I was inhabiting a new life, a second life. And so, there was some positive things that came out of that, but during the experience, there was that absolute, complete disconnection. And so I guess a question there is this similar to what you're talking about? Is this what the dark night of the soul is? And if so, in terms of getting through it, is it, what are you seeing there as well?
It sounds like you might have had a mini dark night of the soul. But typically, when I talk to people, I mean, this can last for like 6 months or a year. It's usually a long-term type of experience with people.
Wow.
And it usually takes some type of outside help to get them out of it.
Wow.
And especially it's because imagine if you go from that wonderful state of consciousness and you didn't have the sense of being reborn the next day, struggling with that feeling of, what happened. And why am I not back in this expanded state of consciousness?
Yeah, do those typically happen after or during a Kundalini awakening? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, an awakening of some type, and it doesn't have to be a radical awakening. It can just literally be a gradual awakening. But I'd say the one thing that's mandatory is that people have a sense of an expanded state of consciousness for a period of time. For a period of time in their lives where they feel super connected, intuitive, and blessed and guided.
Got it. So it seems like the downside of maybe a cycle that they're going through, because I know that, before I had this initial, or this, let's say, call it a breakthrough experience, or this experience of higher consciousness, for many, many years, I would go through states where I would be extremely sensitive to people's energies. I would pick things up from the environment that are simply just not possible with your five senses. And many, many other very profound internal experiences were happening, and they would come in waves. I would have a period of like intense, let's say, awareness or sensitivity, and then that would be oftentimes accompanied by another period where those sensitivities were still there, but more, it felt like I was going through something, or like I was cleansing something, and it was very difficult at times. And then you kind of come through another cycle. So I went through many, many of those cycles before, and continued, with persistent effort, healing and inner work to kind of cleanse myself, leading up to for many years, leading up to this very powerful experience of higher consciousness. But it sounds like, as Linda was saying, these things kind of come in cycles.
It's life.
Exactly. And that's something it took me a long time to understand. And that's one thing that drove me to write my book, write my book, which will be hopefully out in the less than a month. I titled it A Handbook for Badass Spiritual Warriors.
Cool.
And it started out as this list of 10 things I used to have on my bulletin board of reminders, like when I felt myself going into a lull, into a dark place, or feeling really disconnected. Oh yeah, because when you're down there, you can't remember what you're supposed to do, no matter how much training, no matter what type of expanded state you've had before. And then I go, oh yeah, I'm going to go look at my list. And so that list, first I thought, oh, it'll be like just a little PDF I'm going to hand out to people. And then it was like, oh, it's going to be a 10-page book. And then now it's, I think it's almost 100 pages. But those cycles are, and understanding that those are okay and it's normal, and how do you actually get back from those cycles? That's what prompted me to put that whole thing together.
Yeah, and it's a great book. I remember one of the things Corinne was always telling me is like, tools. People need tools. And one day I was like, I read your book before you started writing more into it, and it really did help me as well. And I would even probably credit it, now that I look in retrospect, to the fact that I'm more organized even with how I schedule our activities with the boys in our homeschooling session. And so I really do believe that having the guidance like that, just a little list of what helps you stay in balance during this process, or just to keep a balance of your emotional state and mental state, is really, really helpful.
Wow. Oh, thank you for that. That's nice to hear. Thank you. But so all these things are born out of trial and error and pain, and and figuring out what works and doesn't work, and it's part of this whole process. But that we go through such similar things is what tells you that it's real. It's a collective experience, and people, we find each other. And now we can, thank God we have, social media, we've got the internet where we can actually find each other and share these experiences, because I know probably when all of us first started having these, it was much harder to find anybody. But Mike, but you started the Emerging Sciences Foundation when you were in college, right?
The idea for it was born there. And then many years later, Lynna and I were seeing what was going on in the Kundalini community worldwide, and we felt that there was a need for an organization to actually take on some of these research tasks and do the actual work that needs to be done to move our understanding of Kundalini forward. And so we began researching Kundalini, but then also studying individuals who had awakened Kundalini through surveys and interviews and other things. And now we're getting to a point in our understanding where we really are finding that there are some extremely important common threads with the experience, things that are important to, I think, to understand about the experience overall, in terms of what works, what doesn't, what kinds of experiences might someone expect, where can you get stuck in the process, those types of things. I wanted to kind of, at this point, Corinne, ask you about, we were just talking about life experiences that provided you the wisdom to write this book, and to also create your online course. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what kinds of life experiences did you go through, or how did you stumble upon Kundalini? What sort of brought you to that experience or that understanding? Was it something spontaneous? Was it you started taking on practices, or how did you develop in that way?
Oh, that's a great question. So I started having mystical experiences when I was a child, and also these really bizarre dreams about physics and how they intertwined with each other. And I started learning about spirituality and physics when I was a teenager. I was like 14 or 15, and then managed to find myself a spiritual mentor when I was 17. And he was actually a counselor for families of alcoholics, because my family, we struggled with that and gone through 12-step programs, and there's been a great deal of healing in our family over the years as well. But that's how I found him. And he was my very first mentor. He was like, well, I've been waiting for you. And he taught me a great deal about spiritual development and meditation and learning how to find my wisdom within instead of reading a book. For a while, he's like, do not read any spiritual books of any kind. Instead, I have contemplative practices for you to find your own wisdom. And recently, it's funny, I was looking back at some of my notes because I used to write volumes and volumes on the assignments he gave me. And one of the pieces, I was like, well, I feel this, it feels like a beautiful, like I'm wearing, it's like a silk bliss around me. Like, what is this silky bliss that I feel? And the notes in my assignment, he wrote, that's Kundalini, but you have to be careful with it because that type of energy can get out of control. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean exactly? And so I didn't realize that the word Kundalini had come into my life already when I was probably, 18 or 19, that is at that time. And so I had forgotten about that piece, but then in my mid-20s, I was still meditating and, doing all types of learning how to do different healing modalities, and went to Greece on a trip and was literally sitting in the temple of Asclepius. And they had a mini temple to Isis, and I was sitting and meditating, and that's where I had my first massive experience of Kundalini energy move through me. And that one felt like a fire hose of the essence of the divine, every time I think about it, it's like the impulse of creation. That's really what that essence was. But it came through me like a fire hose. And it was the most extraordinary energy that one could feel. And at that moment, I knew that's what my life was going to be about. And I'm like, but I don't know how to recapture that feeling. Like, when do I actually feel that? And so, years go by of continued meditative practices and trying to learn how to be unpsychic, because I was, just like you, Mike, you pick up stuff you don't want to pick up. And okay, I'm done with having other people's dreams and tapping into their stuff. And, it's just, I'm done with getting on the bus and knowing what the person in front of me was feeling. I don't care. I just want to have my energy feel clear. And then I was practicing sending healing energy back and forth to a friend of mine. We probably did this for a good 6 months. And I think just having that continued practice along with meditation and dancing, for me, I'm a dancer as well. I love dancing. So that combined effort created an electron leap of another, I call it massive Kundalini expansion, where I woke up one day and I was on the corner of the bliss state that people talk about. And that's where all of a sudden I would feel like if I was feeling great, it felt wonderful. And if I wasn't feeling so good, it felt like electricity moving through my body. And, but that experience, there were so many more things that went on with that experience as well that really led me to seeing you have to balance this energy and you have to take the time to understand. It's like having an extra arm. If you've got active Kundalini energy, you have to take the time to balance it. Otherwise, you will feel out of balance. Your emotions will be out of balance. Your body's going to be out of balance. You just have to actually do those things. So, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there that I thought was interesting. In that when people come to you, one of your recommendations oftentimes is to not read anything related to Kundalini or their experience or anything like that, and really seek that knowledge within, or at least you get in tune with themselves. Is that something that you did that you found was important, and why is that such an important recommendation for people at certain stages of Kundalini awakening?
I think in any point of your spiritual path, it's important to start learning how to cultivate your wisdom from within, and cultivating your intuition from within, and seeing what aligns with your personal path. And this is, thanks for bringing this up, Mike, because it's even Kundalini, even let's call it New Age, the New Age paradigm, the conscious community paradigm, they're all paradigms, they're all constructs. And even like our cultures are a construct. Even how we live in the world it's a construct of perception. And that Kundalini is an evolutionary path that is very unique to each person. And you can't say, well, you have to be vegetarian, or you can't eat sugar. You can't, it just depends on the individual, what is really going to work for them energetically. And if you develop a sense of what is going to make your energy expand and you feel more connected to the divine, that is going to be your answer. What is really going to make you feel that way? Let's see.
It reminds me of this concept of, they call it the epistat, right? Which is that you're born with. So what it is the ability of your brain to determine, based on the food that's in front of you, what you should be eating. And babies, when they're very young, oftentimes have a very strong epistat. So if they're lacking in iron, they'll go after the iron-rich food there. If they're lacking in a certain vitamin, right? What was that?
I said, or the dirt.
Yeah, or they'll eat dirt, or whatever. They're finding out eating dirt is actually, or being in the dirt is actually very beneficial to the development of the immune system. Mm-hmm. So babies kind of have this sense of what they need. And as they grow older, what happens is that, the parent puts the food in front of them and says, finish your plate. And so after some time, the sense kind of goes away because of conditioning. They're used to eating things, so they're going to get into this habit of just eating what's in front of them versus what their body actually needs. And it sounds like what you're talking about is kind of the spiritual version of that, where as we get older and as we get conditioned, we tend to, if there's a problem, we tend to pick up a book or a magazine and get into the latest fad and say, oh, I'm going to try that because it seems like it might be a good idea. But it sounds like what you're recommending is that rather than just doing that, a person may want to step back and look within and get in touch with that part of themselves that already knows what they need, that knows how to nourish themselves, knows how to resolve any problems that they're having with their Kundalini awakening, and to really get in touch with that. And then it sounds like maybe after that, at that point, then maybe slowly wade into gaining book knowledge on it, but really relying on that core sense of wisdom as that pillar first before they go out looking for other. Otherwise, it's just kind of trial and error, and you may not know which rabbit hole you climb down.
Well, that's a really good idea. And I love that suggestion, and I love that we're talking about it. But I think that for a lot of people, something like that might not come to them, especially because if they're from, here, the United States, and they've been going to school since they were little, they've been kind of taught to disregard that area of themselves, to go within, to find the answers. And they've been kind of taught, hey, everything you need to know is in a book. So we kind of just, I would say, unconsciously lean towards others who have been there and just seek what maybe some other person has gone through, instead of nurturing and cultivating that wisdom within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line, between knowing what's good for us. And knowing, should I be meditating 4 hours a day, or should I be meditating 10 minutes a day while I'm going through this? Or should I stop meditating for a while? Or, should I, what are you feeling led to? And then I also really want to just put the caveat in there of, sometimes if you're going through this, you really do just need some outside support. And again, finding a licensed therapist, or if you're going through some type of, if you have a consistent medical pain, definitely go to the doctor, and don't think that you can resolve it on your own. Because I've seen that happen to several people that say, oh, it's just Kundalini moving through me. And then they've come to find out that they either have a heart condition, or they have a tumor or something where they, really need to have it checked out. So those are like the extreme cases. If you've got something big going on you can't resolve, definitely seek a professional's help. I mean, I always say professional, find somebody who's trained, find somebody who has a certification, and because there are a lot of people who claim to be energy healers out there that really, you know, it's I'd rather find somebody who's really gone the path and has spent a great deal of time. So, but anyway, with that being said, because I always get really nervous about that, because it's a fine line between when you ask for help and then how do you look within for those answers, you know. And then of course, you know, it's the contemplative path. You can write, you can journal, and then you can find out what's you know, what works for you. You know, but you have to spend the time to develop your relationship to your inner world. I call it the inner world versus the outer world, because there's so much going on in here. And especially in our culture, we rarely like you said, Linda, we barely spend the time to cultivate what is going on in here. Like even to have access to the intuition of, oh, so-and-so's thinking about me because that thought came randomly, as opposed to it came from a chain of thoughts. You know, how do you learn to differentiate those two things? How do you differentiate, you know, whether you're thinking about something because you saw a movie last night or if it's something from your intuition. So it takes cultivation to understand your own mind as well. But that's something else I do encourage people, you know, because that's what's worked for me, is learning how to find out what's happening in my interior world to help me figure out what's next on my path.
To that, I just recently learned an awesome tool, and I'm just going to share it. It's really quick. It's identifying yes and no within yourself. So, like, spend a few minutes practicing asking yourself questions that you know are a definite yes, and then just feeling your body how a yes feels, and then do the same thing with the nose, and then just feeling your body how the nose feels. So that's just a way of cultivating that inner sense of knowing, you know, and it's pretty cool. Then you can start applying it to the other things, you know, that you don't have true certain knowledge, but that you can access.
I really like that.
Yeah.
What's that?
Is your own internal polygraph.
Internal polygraph.
I found that useful. Like, for example, you know, let's take food, because we were talking about babies and their diet and everything like that. You know, one simple exercise that I use is when I'm going to go eat something, I'll typically ask my body and I'll say, is this something that you want? And what I do is I imagine myself eating the food, and I imagine my body processing it completely, breaking it down and everything. And I visualize what that feels like with that particular food in my body. And then what I'll do is I'll go to something else and I'll say, well, what, you know, do you want this? And I'll visualize that as well. And very oftentimes, you know, what my mouth wants, you know, let's say a bowl of ice cream, you know, versus, you know, a plate of vegetables. My mouth wants that bowl of ice cream, but once you ask the body what it wants, it typically will give you a pretty clear response. And it'll say, you know what, that bowl of ice cream, that'd be great, but that bowl of veggies, how you're going to feel afterward, it's going to be quite different. But you know, just taking those few extra steps, you know, even just a few seconds to do that on even just the dietary level is really important. And you can take that same practice and kind of, you know, like you're suggesting, Corinne, kind of take it to a spiritual level and almost do the same thing where you're saying, is this something that I need? Let me pause for a second, open myself up to my inner wisdom, and I'll see what comes in, and then I will take note of that and respect that, and then I will move forward in my life in the direction that is healthiest. You know, but as you're saying too, there are certain things, if you're having a chronic pain in someplace in your body that, you know, is borderline on an injury, you know, that's something that, you're right. I think a lot of people, you know, especially in, you know, new agey type of people, you know, they'll say, you know, well, I'm just going to work on this energetically, and I don't need to go see a doctor because what do they know? But really, you're right. I mean, you really do have to use the right tool, you know, for the right situation. And if it's something serious, you know, modern medicine, modern psychology has amazing tools available to them to help diagnose and help treat serious illnesses. But I think on the more subtle level, like you're saying, we really should be looking internally for guidance as sort of our touchstone, and then from there continue to gain knowledge and information. Maybe different diets that you can try, or maybe different modalities, things that might work better for you.
Yeah, entirely. I was talking about for me, like what modality ended up working was Kundalini yoga. Ended up being something that really worked well for my energetic system to balance the energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one client, for example, what works for her is Tai Chi, so it can be very different for everybody, like what will help you balance your energy, what's going to make you feel good. And to know that it's like one size does not fit all with this. And that's where I think people get really caught up with the whole, I call it the new age conscious community dogma of that, unless you're doing XYZ, you're not spiritual. And it's like, no, actually, it's your own personal connection to God and what that looks like. And the end result is, do you feel more at peace? Are you a kinder person? I think basically those are the good rules of thumb if it's really working.
And you bring up a good point. And I wanted, before I go into this, I wanted to just, I want to touch on the tools that you recommend, because you're just talking about, tools. And I know that you have a set of tools that you found very helpful for yourself and other people. But, talking about the new age, as you say, the new age conscious community, there's this concept that I have kind of used as a guide for myself, and that is images versus intuition, right? So I can look at someone and they can be wearing prayer beads and, have, a robe on and look totally spiritualed out, where I'm like, yeah, this person's probably on the brink of attaining enlightenment, or maybe they're already enlightened. But in conversation with them, you might sense that maybe they're not as evolved as they might project. And I think a lot of times in today's day and age, there's this projection of spirituality, this projection of wisdom, and that is seen as the most important. And it's only natural, because we're creatures of perception. We see someone who looks and sounds spiritual. Well, they must be. But on the other side, there's intuition, and someone who's tuned into that may not look spiritual at all. They might not even work in a job or being in a situation that you would consider spiritual at all.
Yeah.
But in talking with them, it's clear that they're relying more on their intuition, and your intuition can sense that. And this is someone who is incredibly profound and wise. But, if you put them in a room with 50 other new age people, they wouldn't stand out at all. In fact, they might just get totally ignored. And so I've always tried to kind of tune into that intuition part. And when I'm interacting with someone, ask myself, very subtly, what does the intuition say about this, about the situation, this person, this place, this thing that I'm reading, or anything like that. So just a guiding principle there.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But
I think that's why you put up with me.
And why is that?
Because your intuition told you to overlook my flaws.
Oh, your flaws are overlooked. They are few. So, but I wanted to go into the tools that you use, Corinne, or that you recommend to people, because there are a lot of different modalities out there and a lot of different teachers around Kundalini. But I think most of the time that I see Kundalini teachers, it's either Kundalini yoga, so just physical exercises, or they're they're very specific to certain circumstances. So I just wanted to get a sense from you in terms of the tools that you use and recommend. What are those, and how do people apply those in their lives? How should people apply those?
Well, that's a great question. I've got it's called two offerings of information out in the world. One is the How to Live with Active Kundalini course, and the other is the book, which is coming up soon. And they both have tools. It's funny, I've outlined my tools more clearly in my book, basically for anybody who's on a spiritual path, but it works for anybody who's on their, of course, Kundalini awakening as well, because they dovetail into each other. But there are a couple things I think I really would like to address. Oh gosh, let's see. If you're having issues with Kundalini awakening, some of the tools I really recommend are taking care of your body. That's number one. And for a lot of people, that means sleeping, taking time to actually sleep. And do what you need to do to sleep. If you need to take a melatonin, if you need to do, try to stay away from things that are making you feel groggy the next day. But sleeping is the thing that really heals the body. And then also taking care of your body with what you're eating, of course, but for you, it could mean you need a steak, or for you, it could mean you just need to eat a vegetarian diet. It depends on the person. It depends on the nutrients you need. It depends on what your body's calling for. That's something I was so mystified by for a while. I was like, I actually really feel like I need to eat that steak, but I really don't like the concept of eating meat. But then I found when I actually ate it, my whole energy field expanded and I felt great. I was like, wow, okay, that's different. But does it mean I need to eat steak every day? No, it just means to pay attention to my body, like what I'm actually needing. So that's the name, I honor your body, and if you exercise in general is so paramount to keeping the energy moving more freely. And if you're injured, like I was injured for a couple of years, I had a back issue, which made it very, very challenging, to find other ways of taking care of your body. So either you get a massage, if you can, walks, whatever it takes. So anyway, that's one piece, honor your body. And then the other piece is there's so much of this understanding, to find a community of people, like-minded people, especially if you had a Kundalini awakening or experience that you feel supported by. And this is one reason I put the course together, because I'll be doing an online portion of it as well, but I'm also sending people to Brilliano, because I won't be able to always do an online course to bring people together, and with the live portion of it, like the weekly support groups. But to find and the reason I like what's happening with the Brilliano platform, it's moderated, it's very educational, has heart, and it's informational. And I see a lot of things on Facebook where Facebook circles where people just talk about how hard things are. They don't actually take it to the next step of talking about, wow, hey, here's what's working, and here's how my life is improved, and here's what's amazing. And wow, they stay very stuck in the Kundalini syndrome part of it, the label especially. So, finding a positive, supportive community. So that's the second piece that is very, very important. If you could, even sometimes, going to a local church group, like especially like I love the non-denominational ones. They're amazing. You don't have to go to a yoga studio. You don't have to find some Eastern practice to find a support group. You'd be amazed at where you find people who've had spiritual experiences. So just to find some support. Let's see, another piece here is, and I'm just mainly focused on Kundalini awakenings, like what's really important, some tools for that is what I call is house cleaning. Interior house cleaning, the interior world, taking a look at what are the blocks that are coming up in my life, what do I need to do to move through them, understanding if you're trying to get over something that's just merely a habit, which could be, you might have a habit of negative self-talk, looking in the mirror every morning and going, oh, you look like crap, you look like, you do this better and that better, and that's a habit. And you can easily change that by having positive affirmations around you. And so to either change your habit, or if something's more deep-seated, like some type of PTSD or some type of deep unconscious trauma you carry with you from your childhood or family or past lives, that requires a whole different level of work. that requires that you go deeper with some type of support from people. You might be able to find an amazing book that'll walk you through it, or you might find support in the some type of therapist, or even a group, some type of what do you call it? The self-studies group. I know I can't think of the right word for that at the moment. So those are things that are also tools for introspection. Those things are very helpful, because one other thing that's worth mentioning with Kundalini awakenings is you're more sensitive to all the energy around you, but you're also more sensitive to everything that's going on inside you. Because think about it, if your awareness is expanded, I'm getting excited here, I'm moving my microphone around. It's if you're more expanded, you're going to be able to feel more than the three dimensions in the sense of your body. You'll be able to feel the energy, energies around you. You're going to be able to sense what's happening inside your interior world and your emotions much more clearly as well. So everything's going to feel very pronounced. Because some people are like, oh, I had a Kundalini awakening. Now my whole life is a mess because I'm so emotional. And it's like, well, you're actually just magnifying what's already there. It's nothing, it's just what's already there. And now you're just noticing it more because you're becoming more clear. So you have more of a contrast. And I call it an invitation, like the little quotations from your soul to move through those things. So, that's something else that happens with with tools.
So as you're talking,
introspect. Yeah.
Yeah. As you're talking, the way that I'm thinking about this, and one tool that I found to be helpful as well is the energy field model of the human personality. And that is that, human beings have multiple levels, multiple layers to us. There's a physical level, there's an emotional level, there's an intellectual level, there's the level of connection with other human beings. There's your creativity, your vision of the world and how you manifest that. And then, how everything kind of ties together. And what I like about your suggestions is that, you start with the physical approach, which is to take care of this vessel. And I think oftentimes people in the spiritual community, they often make a distinction between what is going on in themselves spiritually and their physical bodies, right? That these two are different, that I'm having maybe these emotional or maybe psychological things going on, but those can't be related to my body. When in fact, the body is the manifestation really of everything that we are on a physical level. And so when Kundalini awakens, as you say, the sensitivity is magnified. So if there are problems in the physical body and you go through a Kundalini awakening, you're gonna tune into those right away, and they might cause a lot of discomfort. And so addressing those head on and strengthening the physical body is something that is, I think, really important for Kundalini people in general. Then you also mentioned community, and that that filling up of the energy field with connections and positive energy and positive emotions from others, and being someone who when encountering another person, you end up, after that interaction, you both end up with more energy than what you started with. And that's the amazing thing about this living energy, is that there is an infinite amount in the universe, and that we can all get together and magnify it. But then also, and the last thing you mentioned, which I thought was great as well, is doing the inner work. And so I think from what we've seen, a lot of people with very serious Kundalini complications, many times, and this is, I think, true for all of us, we're not always aware of our faults and flaws.
No.
It's very difficult for us as human beings to turn a mirror on ourselves and see ourselves for what we are, in both the positive and the negative light. And by negative, all I mean is those things in us that are resistant to this flow of life within us. And so by working those things out, by ironing out the flaws in our personality, those allow this energy to flow more freely. And, from a scientific standpoint, from a scientific paradigm, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. But from a spiritual standpoint, once you awaken Kundalini, it is so self-evident. It is so apparent to someone who has awakened Kundalini, like you, Corinne, who have developed these tools, it's incredibly important.
I wanted to go over that. I know we keep talking about a Kundalini awakening, and Corinne, you brushed over this a little bit, and I'm really glad that you did. But the Kundalini awakening does not have to be such a big radical experience. It can be very subtle, and in fact, I believe Gopi even said that the more subtle, the slower the process, the better. It means that your vessel is actually very nice and healthy, and is processing the energy, integrating it wholly. When it's sudden, it bursts through a block, and now, maybe that block was the only thing holding the energy back. And now it's gone up, though it does lead to beautiful experiences like the ones you've both had. But for me, it's very, very subtle. And I'm entering all these stages, and everything that you like, your tools, Corinne, they're so amazing, and I can see how they've been applied to my life. But before I even knew about Kundalini, I would argue that my Kundalini was, what did they say, steering, or
Stirring?
steer, yeah. Sorry, ESL, English second language here.
You'd never tell them
But
they're so cute.
so the energy is there, and I believe everyone has this, and everyone, no matter where you at, so if you listen to us saying, "Oh, Kundalini awakenings," if you have not had something that's been like mind blowing, that doesn't mean you are not awakened. Even, is being able to discern in yourself where you are in the process, what you need to integrate, how you need to grow, and then eventually maybe you'll reach this beautiful state of bliss, or of just a profound awakening that leaves you changed. I believe those are all congruent with each other. Maybe they're just different levels or phases of the same energy.
I mean, I would say that a slow awakening process is probably healthier for the individual overall. A very rapid Kundalini awakening all at once, especially in someone who has not done the necessary preparatory work. And I'll give you an example. In ancient India, when you were brought into the temple, or the place that you did your spiritual stuff with your guru, you had to undergo years of preparation, and that's what the modern practices of yoga were developed for, is to purify the vessel, to get it ready for this Kundalini awakening. But it would take years. And Gopi Krishna and others have said that a slow, subtle awakening process is probably healthier, because you look at it like, one way to look at it is like electrical current through a wire, right? If a wire has no resistance, that electrical current's going to flow right through it, and you won't notice a thing. But if that wire is one with a lot of resistance, maybe it's got some issues with it, or maybe it's just built that way, and you send that current through, well, shoot, that plastic sheath is going to burn off. That things are going to catch fire, and it might not be the best thing. And that's an important point, is that people are going through Kundalini awakenings at different speeds, at different processes. I think many people going through an awakening, a Kundalini awakening, don't recognize it as such.
Right.
They're just going through this process of transformation. But if you
Sensitivities,
but speed that up, and now you're having this full blown, what we would label as a Kundalini awakening. But it does definitely happen in subtle ways too.
Yeah, entirely. That's something I've learned as well, is that it's meant to be a slow, gradual, easy process. It's not meant to be jarring, but it can be. And one of the things I've learned also through one of our mutual friends, Laura Seiler, who's a phenomenal Barbara Brennan healer, where she's observed in so many people who've had Kundalini awakenings, is that their energy field is a bit fragmented. The ones who are suffering from, especially from either, let's call it, they're noticing they're having mental challenges or physical challenges. It usually has to do with the energy field having some type of, what you call, is it a fracture of some type, and she's able to mend those together. So now when I talk to people and are having a hard time, I send them to an energy healer who might be able to help repair their field. And I always, again, say somebody who's certified, who's gone through some type of training, somebody who can actually really help. And especially, you know, it happens often for people, I shouldn't say often because that's not true. I've seen it happen for people who have had psychedelic experiences as well. That they're wonderful tools for accessing information and rewiring the brain. However, sometimes it spurs people to have more energy coming through them than their energy field can handle at that moment. So sometimes they might end up feeling a little fragmented or imbalanced, or an energy healing afterwards can really help put them back on the right track. You know, so
that's an interesting point, and you know, it makes me think that when I see interactions with people in the Kundalini community online, you know, very often you'll have people that come in and say, "Oh, you know, I'm awakened. I've had all these different symptoms. I've had these lights and sounds and fireworks displays and everything going on." And there might be some people sitting there on the sidelines saying, "Well, you know, I haven't had any of those things. I've just had a very subtle kind of experience of growth, but I haven't had the light show. That must mean that I'm not awakened." And what, based on what you're saying, Corinne, on the observations of healers, or a healer like Laura Steiler, is that you know, perhaps it's the people that are not symptomatic, that are not going through all these light shows and amazing things, that might be having perhaps a more clear, more profound awakening, because it's just becoming a part of them. They may not even notice that they're entering into this state. And that's kind of how the experience of enlightenment or higher consciousness comes on. It's almost an imperceptible shift that happens, and suddenly you're in a new world, versus kind of being blasted off in a rocket and then arriving at a new place. You know, so just for people out there in the community, if you are, if you're not experiencing the light show and the fireworks, you know, have faith, have faith in your own process, because you may be going through a very profound awakening, and you may have been going through it for years if you reflect on it. But
yeah, you may find that you've been more sensitive, more emotional, more, you know, just higher senses and higher awareness.
And I think that's what Kundalini really is about. It's about this transformation and growth and removing the obstacles to it. So, you know.
Yeah. You know, and some of the things I've noticed with people that I know who, let's say, have a more gradual sustained process, you know, and it's funny, like, when I meditate, I have these amazing experiences, but I haven't, you know, had any phenomenal big things. So I must not have had a Kundalini awakening. And it's like, no, actually, you are highly intuitive. You sense the energy around you. You get divine, you know, messages all the time. And so it's like, that is an indicator that you are definitely connected. You don't have to have a massive, you know, night and day experience, you know, and to me, anybody that has any type of spiritual longing at all, I mean, there's something in the soul that's calling you, which means that, I mean, to me, your Kundalini is awake and alive and well. It is pulling you forward. It is like, to me, it's like the voice of your soul pulling you to just be more of a part of the divine. And, you know, and again, like I said this before, like my true test, I always, you know, say is, are you evolving in the sense, are you feeling kinder? Are you feeling more loving? Are you more open-minded? Those are really the true test of, to me, like, what does it really mean to be spiritual? But also, you know, I want to go back to that I don't think we've mentioned it yet, the study that the Emerging Science Foundation has conducted with all of the large sample. I think it's about 300 people worldwide who've had different types of spiritual experiences, because this fascinates me on, you know, what is a common, like, what are common denominators for people who've had, let's call it expansive spiritual bliss-like experiences, as opposed to people who've maybe had a challenging time with Kundalini. So I know there's some things in there, but I'd love to hear from you guys with the latest things you're pulling out of the data, or things you might find in the data.
Yeah, so I can talk about a few of those. And one of the interesting points is around energy symptoms, or people experiencing a lot of energy moving in the body. And looking at, and it's almost, I think our last survey is almost 600 participants who have submitted the survey and provided many times very detailed write-ups of their Kundalini awakening experiences. So there's a lot there. But one of the things that we see in the data is around energy experiences that people are having and bliss sensations. So I would say, and I'm going to overgeneralize here, but there are really, let's say 3 groups of people. One is where they're having a lot of energy sensations and a lot of negative symptoms as well. So it's almost like the analogy that I was making earlier with the electricity through the wire. They're kind of that highly resistant wire. Maybe there are a lot of blocks. It could be hereditary, it could be environmental, maybe emotional wounds or whatever it might be in their life that is preventing this free flow of energy. And so that is one group of people. Another group of people are folks that have experienced very high bliss states, and these people have gone through this awakening process. They've had many times energy sensations, and they've gone through this transformation and gone through various bliss states. But then there's a third group of people that we're most interested in terms of the research. And these are people who have had experiences of what we are calling higher consciousness. Mm. And higher consciousness roughly is an experience where someone has an awareness of consciousness, not as sort of this secondary thing that in our lives that's behind all of our senses and our mind, but they perceive consciousness as directly as the underlying basis of reality. And in those experiences, very often we find that the bliss sensations and everything else associated with the Kundalini awakening are magnified immensely. So their bliss experiences are through the roof, energy sensations as well. But what we're seeing are there are perhaps turning points that an individual has to go through. And if you look back at the ancient Hindu scriptures, one thing you find very often is that they say, when you feel an energy pass through you, or when you feel a bliss state, if you become attached to that, then you will define yourself by that state, and you will not be able to look beyond to behold the self, the true self, at the heart of every human personality. Wow. And so oftentimes I think as people go through this process, they identify with one of these states. Either they identify with the energy sensations that are going through them, and they may get stuck there. It may be very negative for them. So we're seeing that. Or you may go through bliss states, and you may identify with those bliss states, and you'll say, this is who I am. This is what this is all about. But it seems like either spontaneously or perhaps through cultivation, this additional group of people who are experiencing higher consciousness, they seem to have blasted through those previous 2 things somehow, and gone right to kind of the core of the experience, this experience of higher consciousness, where they are in that state essentially shedding all of the sheaths or layers of their personality, and now are identifying with this new higher consciousness, this newly developed awareness. Wow. And that is something that comes about through a transformation of the brain. And so I would say that if you're going through an experience, or you're one of these types, I'm having tons of energy sensations, I am Kundalini master, is I would maybe take a step back and say, is this something that you're identifying with? Are you focused on, do you have your eye on the prize, which is higher consciousness, which is a higher awareness? And if so, the process of Kundalini awakening becomes one of shedding, one of giving up, one of letting go of these identifications with these other things, and allowing yourself to move ever closer towards higher consciousness.
I wanted to add to that too. A lot of people who I believe have reached that state you're talking about, the higher consciousness, they also find they come to a state of utter peace with the world. Because for me, it was really, really challenging. And I would talk to them and I'd be like, but how do you make peace with the world the way it is? And it's not that they're not out there trying to change it. By now becoming one with source or God or the divine, they understand this process. And one of the things that has been, I don't want to use the word correlated, but that comes along with it is love, a sense of deep, deep love, and that being like the connective tissue of reality.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've been blessed to have, I say, moments of that state of being. And I think I, at one point, was he even had it for like 2 weeks, where I would go to bed at night. It would feel like I was sleeping in the arms of God. I mean, literally, it was so peaceful and blissful. And I wish I could just call upon that state and make it happen all the time. But, it's like, it's an evolving process. And what's fascinating about this is somebody sent me a book who actually bought the course. And it's funny. Their names are Mike and Linda as well. And it's Michael Quinn and Linda Quinn. And they put together this book. It's Inspiration Passages from Near-Death Experiences to comfort the dying. And I know I've heard about near-death experiences being similar to some of the more bliss-like Kundalini experiences. And it's something I, until yesterday, had never looked into. And I realized that's a little piece I want to add some information in the course. I'll probably do that under the mystical states of consciousness, that one chapter. And I found a wonderful academic paper on it as well, which is like, oh God, we gotta like take a look at this stuff. But this little book that he put together talks about that same state of unconditional love and bliss and peace when people pass through the portal of death, and how that feels. And I was like, my God, there is that similarity to the ultimate, I don't know if it's the ultimate state, or maybe it's just another doorway to another level, but that state you talk about, Mike, the state of love and bliss, where you're connected to all things, and then suddenly you realize everything is happening according to plan. Everything has a divine order. Everything is truly made out of love and is love. And it's like I've had moments of that, so I can intellectually grasp it at the moment, but I'm no longer there in states of consciousness. That's, and it's amazing for the people who are able to stay there. I suppose that would be a good life goal, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to mention that about the near-death experiences. I find it fascinating because you're releasing everything, and then you are tapping into that same state of being.
But I would say even these experiences, and I think near-death included, is that if you do have a profound experience, there is a huge piece of that you do take back with you. And I think that's one of the messages from people who have had near-death experiences, is that many times they come back transformed with a completely different perspective about life and death, and how to treat people in the world, and their purpose here and everything like that. And I think it's the same thing for Kundalini experiences of varied types, is that you may have an experience that's fleeting, but the way that I look at it is, even though it may not be as powerful and present now, you still take the core essence of it with you. And I think it takes sometimes a lifetime even just to integrate that information and to to live by it. We only have a few minutes left, so I just wanted to talk about just quickly here, Corinne, you're talking about these experiences of bliss and very expansive experiences that people might be having. And so an example of someone having this experience on a Sunday, and they go to bed, and now Monday morning they find themselves in the workplace with people who are perhaps not like them at all. Maybe some of them are. Maybe they work in a really great work environment, and it's it's good that way. But then maybe they go home and turn on the news and they see all the things that are going on in the world. And so, one question that I have, for you is, going from those states and now coming back into the world, where we have, all of the challenges and things that we have to do day to day just to maintain ourselves, our families, and so forth. Kind of what is your approach or recommendation there for people who are going through these Kundalini experiences? How do I go back now into the world and integrate myself and integrate all the aspects of my life in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, I actually put a whole chapter on that in the course on spirituality in the workplace. Because what I found, what helps me the most is when I distill my spiritual experiences down into principles of how do I treat people, how do I interact with people, how do I allow people to interact with me that feels comfortable, and a sense of gratitude. It's like maintaining that sense of, actually, if I have to think about it, the most important thing is to maintain a sense of gratitude. When you're in the work environment, you can have the principles of, being transparent with people, wanting to connect authentically with people to understand what's really going on for them, but also maintaining a sense of being grateful for what you do have, because that will actually change your brain chemistry in general. And then you can be the transmitter. It's like, then you become the messenger of peacefulness and kindness, no matter what type of environment you're in. And you don't even have to say much. You are who you are. I love that saying, even though it wasn't originally meant this way, but it's like, who you are speaks louder than your words. I forgot the exact thing, but it's, you carry who you are with you, and just by your small interactions, how you look at people, etc. And so that is one way to maintain that in the world, and also in the workplace. Other things, sometimes you might need to have affirmations, literally sitting in front of you by your desk. You might need to take time out and go in the bathroom and do like some type of kriya that strengthens your solar plexus area, because I find when you strengthen the solar plexus area, that will give you a protective shield around your body, your energy field. That's like another quick hack. How do you be in the world and not allow things to really sway you off your center, something you didn't even get to talk to yet? That was one of the tools, actually. But those are some very basic things to do.
I do want to add, if you guys are interested, we do list Corinne's course and even Laura Styler's website on the Emerging Sciences website, the Learning Center. So it would be emergingsciences.org, and then go to the Learning Center, and there you have a list of resources.
We'll also put the links in the bottom of the video here on YouTube. But Corinne, I just wanted to thank you and acknowledge the suggestion of gratitude. I think what you're saying in a way, for me, the way I'm interpreting it, is that instead of looking for things in your environment to kind of fill you up, you become that power source. You become that power source of positivity that can charge other people around you, and then open yourself up to greater and greater life experiences. And maintaining that sense of gratitude allows you to kind of be that rock.
Be that change you wish to see in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's not easy sometimes. It's like, sometimes you got to just tough it out and go, well, that person's this way and that person's that way. Why should I be nice if they're not going to be nice to me? It's like you have to take the high road. And they kind of like forcing yourself to do it. And I have this written, actually, this part's written out in my book, but it's like, you have to do a gratitude list in the beginning of the day and end of the day. You handwrite the list, because that really helps rewire your brain. It actually changes your entire neurochemistry. It's not just about being happy for the things you have. It changes how your brain is wired. It's amazing what it does. And so that can help carry you no matter what type of situation you find yourself in. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to express our gratitude today, Corinne, for you joining us here on the Kundalini Connection. Great to have you on, and thank you for sharing all the tools and experiences and things that you've learned along the way. My hope is that this video can serve as and podcast can serve as a source of information and knowledge and tools for other people going through a Kundalini awakening. So thank you very much for coming on.
Great. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you guys, and thank you for doing all the work you do with the Emerging Sciences Foundation. I mean, it's completely based on time and people's donating their time, and so that's another thing. It's like you guys are promoting my course, and I'm promoting the Emerging Science Foundation. And if you love this work, please make a donation, and there's a place on the website for that as well. Because that's also part of the proceeds of the course also go to the Emerging Science Foundation. But if you love the work, any support is really greatly really appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Corinne. We'll go
All
ahead
right,
and
guys.
broadcast now. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
All righty. Bye.